let's get into the basics of selecting stitches, width, needle position, and stitch length. Before we get started though, a lot of people ask, do I need to hold on to these threads when I start to sew? As long as your fabric is underneath the needle when it takes its first stitch, you do not need to hold these threads. And you can see here that they're not going to move anywhere once you start stitching. You can have those threads brought out to the 9 o'clock, right out to the left side, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or straight out the back if that's how you've been taught. And once you have it set, it's really easy to go. Now, right now, we've got the needle set to stop in the down position. You can see it right here on the screen. The needle is got an arrow pointing down. You can change that with this button here. So if we wanted to always stop in the up position, we'll set it so now when I stop, the needle's always up. A very quick way to sink that needle down into the fabric is actually to touch and hold the button for 2 seconds. When you do that, the picture on the screen still stays in the up position, but now it's sunk it down just to have it stop in the fabric. So I love that. So for example, like when I'm always stopping with it in the fabric, which I do that when I'm turning a corner. Okay, really easy to do that easily. Or when I'm working on a very heavy project, so it's big, it's bulky, that needle in the fabric is going to help hold the fabric so I don't pull it out from away from the stitching line that it's forming as I go to move it into position. So that's where I use it. But as soon as I get to the end, well, instead of turning the hand wheel, use the button up front. Touch and hold, 1, 2, and it brings your needle up and out of the fabric. And then you can bring it out and cut your thread on the side. Okay, let's talk stitch length. On the machine, you're going to see that it is set up right around just over 2. That's 2 millimeters in the setting here. So if you are working on heavier fabrics, you do want to make it a little bit longer, say almost up to 3. Experiment. So when you are working with your fabric, you don't want to have to push your fabric through. When you have your hand set, you want to have one hand is up front holding the fabric and this one's off to the side. Let the machine do the work for you. By letting the machine pull the fabric through, you have less issues of breaking the needle because you're pushing it or pulling it out the backside. If it's ever a need, go ahead and lengthen that stitch even a little bit more. Some of those really heavy, stretchy fabrics might need a little bit help. I love on the screen that it leaves you a little blinking light of where normal is. The easiest way to come down back to that normal setting is to reach over to the clear button and push it 1 time. It'll bring you back to and reset that stitch. So you can make it short all the way down. You've got nice short stitches. You can get down to a satin stitch range, which we'll do in just a second here. So we'll clear it back out to a regular setting. You also have needle position. That's this little dot in the center here, and it can be moved to the right or to the left with all the different increments. Right now, the needle is down in the fabric. So if you do move the needle position, it is okay because the needle will not move until it comes up to the highest position. So if I want to move it all the way to the far right side, when I sew, you'll see it come up and then it will jump over to the right and start to stitch. We'll use that with top stitching. Anytime that I want to sew near the edge, instead of trying to get the needle closest by moving the foot and having maybe one toe not on the fabric, I'll often keep the fabric underneath the foot, then move the needle over, and then I have more even feeding to the fabric. Again, if I push clear, it will bring it right back to the center of the foot here. Okay, stitch width. Let's talk stitch width. On the Bernina 215, the stitch width max is 5.5 millimeters wide. That is a nice wide stitch. We can pick a zigzag and it will automatically set you up to a nice width and length for this particular stitch, which you can change while you're sewing. So if we want it a little bit longer, we can hold our stitch length button in, make it super long, and then we can also make it a little bit wider. So here is the widest setting that this machine will actually stitch. Once again, we have the needle stopping in the fabric. We can touch and hold. That will bring that right on up, and I can take it out so we can take a look. Isn't that amazing? All the settings that you can do with this machine. Okay, if we push clear, we can bring it back down to its normal setting. Another thing that you could do is you could reduce the stitch length while you sew and turn this zigzag into a perfect applique satin stitch. There is a little kind of a hash mark right above 0 on your stitch length bar here. So I'm coming down. Now, depending on your thickness of thread, this will be of different settings. So what I do is I keep touching it until I see my stitches completely close up and there's no gap in between them. Also, I should not have to help this go through the machine. So as soon as the machine stops feeding the fabric, I have gotten it too close and it's starting to pile up, then what I'll need to actually do is actually make it so it's a little longer. Get off that pile that you've created and then start again. So you can always get this just right. Let me try one more down. Oh, it's close, but it's going. Now I can make that any width that I want, so I can make it a little bit wider. And this is what we're actually creating if you want to see. See how nice and pretty we've gotten that satin stitch? This has a little gap still between, but as soon as I got that close, it really made it much nicer as you go to sew. That is how you make a satin stitch. One thing nice that I love about the Berninas is, let's say we have dialed in this perfect satin stitch. When you select a straight stitch or any other stitch of the machine, okay, we can go back, we can sew a seam, we can get up back to where we needed to be, and then we need to return to that satin stitch. Bernina has an altered memory function. You don't have to do anything to have it set up. It just does it automatically. Watch. When we select stitch number 2, which was our zigzag that we had reduced our length to, see, it remembered the last width, length, and it will also remember the needle position that I had that stitch. Now, as soon as the machine is turned off, that is returned back to the default settings. So if you need to kind of make a note of where you were at from day to day, you can easily get back to it. But I like it because during my sewing, it always remembers. So that means every single stitch has its own little mini memory for your settings that you're working with. Here's a place that I have used that in the past. You will find that if you're a machine quilter, you might have, say, a walking foot on, you're doing stitch in the ditch or straight line stitching. You often are referenced to shorten your stitch length to a small one or less stitch length to start off your little stitches instead of doing it all right in the same hole. Then you go back to the longer stitch length to create your seam or top stitching that you're doing, and then you shorten the stitches back up when you go to end. Watch what we can do with the Bernina altered memory. We can take stitch number 1, our straight stitch, and let's make that to the length that we would normally sew at. Then take your zigzag, change it to 0 width, which would take it to a straight stitch, and then reduce the stitch length down to about 1. And now that is kind of our beginning stitch. So we'll start off with little teeny tiny stitches, teeny 5 or so stitches. Then you touch stitch number 1. It goes back to your full stitch length. And when you're ready to end the settings, you can go back to your zigzag, which is a straight stitch with little teeny short stitches. That is an awesome way to use this altered memory look. Those short stitches will not come out. You can clip this right down to the end and not have to worry about burying those threads at all. So that's a little bit more of a technique for the machine quilters, and you can come back once again, trim this back side, and that is not going to come out. Have you ever tried taking out little tiny stitches? Well, yeah, they just don't come out. So that's how you can make your machine do all the work for you. Now, traditionally, when you do locking stitches, what we're going to do is use the reverse button. That's going to be right here on the machine. When you look at this, you're going to notice there's actually 2 reverse arrows because there's kind of 2 functions depending on how you actually use this. So what we're going to do is when we start off with a seam, normally you take some stitches forward, hold the button in, it will go back in the exact same stitches that you formed, and then go forward again. When you get down to the end of your fabric, you would do that again. Reverse back and forward, and then end. And then you can pull it out. That is how we would lock, lock a seam for most any traditional sewing, garment sewing, something that you would do with a home deck or pillow, that type of thing. You also have that feature that allows you to sew in reverse continuously. So if you ever get it more, this is more people like accidentally get it in this mode and they don't know why their machine is sewing backwards. But there has been a point on a project I have worked on that I have needed to sew backwards. So here's how you actually get it. You're going to tap it two times very quickly, and it will come up with the reverse symbol on your screen. That is going to allow the machine to sew backwards without you having to hold this button in. So let's say you're working on a project and you're actually stitching down and then you need to stitch backwards this way. So as I'm stitching down, here, let me get it off. Okay, stitching down, and I'll stop with the needle in the fabric. Instead of turning my fabric all the way around to come this direction, when it's a large project, that's going to be kind of tight in with here. All I have to do is come this way, lower the presser foot down, double touch the reverse button, and now all I have to do is stitch back until I get to where I need to be. Once I touch it again, it turns off that symbol on the screen, and I will be able to then sew forward once again. So double touch means you're going to get it into a continuous reverse mode. You just hold it during your sewing. It will just do what you probably are used to using with the reverse button. Needles down. If I want to take my fabric out, touch and hold the needle up button. Love that feature. And then that will put it back up to the proper stitch, where it means that the stitch is actually finished.